George Washington and Alexander Hamilton created the First National Bank in 1791. Hamilton had long believed in the need for banks to provide credit and stimulate the economy. The bank would be able to lend the government money and safely hold its deposits, give Americans a uniform currency, and promote business and industry by extending credit. It would take the place of the gold and silver money that was in circulation at that time. Banknotes would make more business growth possible. They wouldn't have to rely on exports to increase their money supply if they had banknotes. It would help place the United States on an equal financial footing with the nations of Europe. The first Bank of the U.S. had a charter from 1791 to 1811. It was then up to Congress to approve or deny its renewal. Although it was well managed and profitable, critics charged that the first bank's fiscal caution was constraining economic development and its charter was not renewed in 1811. Others were troubled by the fact that two-thirds of the bank stock was held by British interests. These critics, working with opponents of the bank, succeeded in preventing renewal of the charter in 1811, and the first bank went out of operation. The bank was a key factor in the creation of America's first organized opposition party, the Republicans. That same year, Republicans captured the White House in 1800 and continued control did not go well for the bank, and when its first charter expired in 1811, the Senate rejected a bid to renew it. The closing of the First National Bank in 1811 caused the country to be financially unstable. Without the bank, the country suffered great loss in financial funds. President Madison felt the consequences during the War of 1812 when there was no central bank to fund the military effort, and as a result, he endorsed renewal in 1816. The War of 1812, however, demonstrated the need for a bank, and plans were formulated in 1814 by James J. Dallas, Secretary of the Treasury. Congress wanted to bring back the central bank because of the financial problems and inflation caused by the War of 1812. The Second Bank of the United States was founded in 1816. The bank could provide loans, pay bills, collect taxes, and move money around the country. It was a private concern but acted to control the currency of the United States. This function brought it into frequent conflict with state and local banks, particularly in the South and West. It was supposed to steady the economy, but gross mismanagement in its early phase sapped its effectiveness. The bank's problems arose at precisely the wrong moment when the economy needed to be strong during post-war expansion. Although the bank sharply contracted loans in 1818, the damage had been done. The Bank of the United States, far from helping the economy, was among the destabilizing forces that led to the Depression of 1819. At the same time, swelling crop fields in Europe reduced the demand for American farm products, whose prices plunged. An economic contraction in Europe led banks to reduce their credit. The crisis abroad, coupled with the contraction at home, forced American banks to call in their loans as well. By early 1819, credit, once was so easy, was unavailable to many Americans. With gold and silver reserves depleted, many American banks failed, and other businesses followed. Sales of public lands plummeted, unemployment soared, and in some regions food and other basic necessities were difficult to come by. Andrew Jackson's own feeling toward banks was based on better personal experience. In 1795, wanting to establish a trading post, he sold 68,000 acres to a man named David Allison. Taking the latter's promissory notes in payment, he used the notes as collateral to buy supplies for his trading post. But when Allison went bankrupt, Jackson was left holding the bag. It would take him 15 years to finally settle everything. It left him with a lifelong horror of debt. Andrew Jackson was in opposition to the bank. He was a hard money man, believing that all paper money had to be backed by gold and silver. He argued on the one hand that no constitutionality authority existed for the creation of a federal bank, and on the other that the bank's issuance of paper money was detrimental to the health of the economy. He felt it benefited merchants and investors at the expense of the majority of the population. This view put him at odds with many working people in the South and the West were soft money advocates, believing that paper money should be issued liberally and not to be backed up in full by gold and silver. Jackson's argument rested primarily on the 10th Amendment that all powers not endowed to Congress are retained by the states or the people. Jackson made the following statements about the bank during his second campaign. The bank violated traditional popular laws. The bank's relevance to constitutionality was weak. Congress had not received power to incorporate a bank or any other governmental agency. The bank is run by board of directors with ties to industry and manufacturing. Jackson felt the bank was biased toward the urban and industrial northern states. Jackson resented the bank's lack of funding for expansion into the unsettled western territories. Jackson objected to banks' unusual political and economic power and lack of congressional oversight over its business dealings. Jackson ran for a second term as president in 1828. He used as the bank focal point of his campaign. He called his campaign the Bank War. He won election. Jackson called for an investigation into the bank's policies and political agenda as soon as he settled into the White House in March 1829. He appointed Roger Taney as his Attorney General and became his legal advisor during Jackson's second presidential campaign. He advised Jackson to withdraw federal funds from the government. As of October 1st, 1833, federal funds were no longer deposited in federal bank. They were then deposited into 23 pet banks. He presented his case against the bank in a speech to Congress. Congress disagreed. 3 years went by. Jackson went against the advice of his congressional committees and vetoed the request for a new bank charter. On this day in 1833, Andrew Jackson announced that the government will not use the second bank of the U.S., the country's national bank. They would not deposit money after October 1st. The bank's charter expired in 1836. Congress disagreed with Jackson's decision. They even censured him for his abuse of power in February 1834. Here is a political cartoon that shows Henry Clay sewing Jackson's mouth together. Nicholas Biddle tried to stop Andrew Jackson by calling in loans and taking away credit and presenting state bank notes for redemption. He hoped to create a recession that would force Jackson and Americans to beg for mercy and reopen the bank the way it was. He thought this would draw attention to needing a centralized bank, but it actually backfired on him. It actually emphasized the dangers of the central bank. Jackson then used his executive power to remove all federal funds from the bank and put them into state banks, which were known as pet banks, in the final act of what is referred to as the Bank War. Andrew Jackson rose up from almost nothing to the highest office in America. He improved public education, abolished debtors' prisons, cared for the sick, and organized women's rights. He inspired people that they could do anything. Jackson's plan made it possible for people with low credit and very little money to buy land. By eliminating the second U.S. bank, Jackson eliminated the national debt for a period of time. Andrew Jackson cherished the extinction of the national debt during his administration as a personal triumph.